All right, let's dive right in. We're about to tackle one of the Bible's most, baffling passages. It's a really strange ancient story. You've got celestial beings, powerful heroes, and maybe, most famously, the birth of giants. This is a story that has had scholars scratching their heads for literally thousands of years.
So really, it all boils down to this one question. Tucked away right there in Genesis, just before we get to the story of Noah and the Great Flood, there's this brief, almost cryptic account of giants walking the earth. The big question is, where in the world did they come from? And believe me, the answer to that has been debated for centuries. And this is the verse from Genesis chapter 6 that just kicks the whole thing off. The real heart of the mystery is locked up in just a few key phrases. First, you've got the Nephilim, which is often translated as giants. Then there are the sons of God, and finally, the daughters of humans. Figuring out who these three groups actually are, that's the key to the entire puzzle. So how do we even begin to explain this? Well, the first major theory out there, it just leans right into that supernatural vibe you get from the text. It suggests that these sons of God, they weren't human at all.
This is what's known as the fallen angel theory, and it's probably the most famous one. The idea is that the sons of God were actual divine angelic beings. The story goes that a group of them rebelled, came down from their heavenly home and, had children with human women. And the result? A powerful hybrid offspring.
Now, the folks who support this view, they point to some pretty strong evidence. First off, you look elsewhere in the Old Testament, right? Like in the book of Job, and almost every time you see that phrase, sons of God, it's talking about angels. And then, get this, ancient Jewish texts that aren't in the Bible, like the book of Enoch, they tell this exact story. They even call the fallen angels the Watchers and say they corrupted humanity. And, let's be honest, a supernatural union, that's a pretty direct explanation for how you get supernatural kids, the giants.
Okay, but what if the answer isn't supernatural at all? What if we've been looking in the wrong place? A second major theory brings this whole drama right back down to Earth. It argues that the real conflict here isn't between heaven and earth, but between two different human families. And this one is called the Sethite theory. It argues that the sons of God were actually the godly descendants of Adam's good son, Seth, and the daughters of humans, they were women from the ungodly family line of his brother Cain. So, you see, the story suddenly isn't about angels and humans anymore. It's about the corruption that happens when the good family line starts mixing with the bad one.
And supporters of this will say, look, you don't even need to leave the book of Genesis for the evidence. Right before this story, Genesis chapter 4 lays out Cain's sinful family, and chapter 5 lays out Seth's righteous one. So chapter 6 becomes the natural, tragic climax to that whole storyline. It also fits perfectly with what comes right after, the text blaming the world's great wickedness on mankind. This keeps the focus squarely on human sin, and it gives a really clear reason why God's judgment, the flood, was for all of humanity.
Okay, so now we've got two really compelling but totally conflicting theories. One is divine, the other is human. It's time to put them both on trial, so to speak, and see how they really hold up under a little cross-examination.
And you know what? Each theory has some serious strengths going for it. The angel theory? It gives a super simple, direct answer for where these superhuman giants came from. Plus, it's got all that ancient tradition backing it up. The Sethite theory, though, it fits the flow of Genesis like a glove. It keeps the spotlight on human sin, and it gives a really logical reason for the flood to be a judgment on, humanity.
But, and this is a big but, each theory also runs into some pretty tough questions. For the angel theory, you have to ask, if angels were the main culprits, why was all of humanity punished so severely with the flood? And then there's that verse in the New Testament, in Matthew, where Jesus himself says angels in heaven don't get married. The Sethite theory, it's got a huge problem too. How on earth could a union between two normal humans produce giants, the Nephilim? And why would the Bible use such a grand, lofty title like Sons of God, just to talk about one human family? So, with these clear weaknesses in both of the main theories, it's probably no surprise that the mystery is still very much alive.
All this ambiguity has opened the door for other people to come up with their own interpretations as they keep wrestling with this incredibly strange passage. For example, there's another theory that suggests the sons of God weren't angels or Sethites, but powerful, tyrannical, ancient kings. I mean, think about it. In the ancient Near East, it was super common for rulers to claim they were divine. So maybe this is just a story about the royal abuse of power. You know, kings taking any woman they wanted, and their powerful children becoming these famous, fearsome warriors.
And then, if you want to get really creative, there's this one fringe idea that suggests the problem wasn't about family lines at all. It was about diet. Seriously. This hypothesis argues that when humans disobeyed God's original command to only eat plants and started eating meat, that sin led to violence and, get this, physical mutations, which resulted in giants. Now, it's a pretty novel way to try and solve the puzzle, for sure, but it is highly speculative. There's really no direct support for it in the text.
So, where does all of this leave us? Well, while there are some other interesting ideas floating around, the fallen angel theory and the Sethite theory, they really are still the two heavyweights, the main contenders in this ancient debate. And honestly, there's just no clear winner. Both sides have great arguments, and both sides have serious problems.
The really crucial takeaway here is that the identity of the sons of God is still a genuine unsolved mystery. The text is it's too brief to give us a definitive final answer. But here's the thing that isn't a mystery: the whole point of the story. No matter which theory you lean towards, everyone agrees that this passage is there for a reason. It's a powerful setup for the flood story, painting a picture of a world that had become so corrupt that divine judgment seemed like the only way forward.
So what was it? A divine scandal that tragically spilled over onto Earth? Or a purely human tragedy about a righteous family that fell into sin? You know, maybe the real power of this ancient story is that it forces us to wrestle with these very questions. It's a great reminder that some stories aren't there to give us easy answers. They're there to make us think.